Welcome to the Directors Series. Now, for several years, I've been discovering movies, the history of film, and I have found the easiest way to do that is through directors, focusing on particular directors, going through their entire body of work, and coming to a conclusion about who they are as artists, what the industry that they worked in was like, the pressures that they had to deal with in order to get to it, as evidenced through the movies themselves. I'm not that interested in biography of these people. I'm not that interested in the behind-the-scenes information unless it's really necessary to tell the story of a particular film, or sometimes like large gaps within a director's filmography. And I found it to be a very useful way to go through film. It's not the only way to go through film, but after watching the bodies of work of about 40 to 50 directors, I feel like it's a good way to approach the history of cinema. Now, the point of this series is going to be focusing on individual directors, talking about who they are, talking about what their body of work is like, just trying to unravel who they are as artists through their films. But this first video is going to be a little different. In this one, I'm going to talk about Auteur Theory. Now, Auteur Theory is the obvious place to go when talking about directors and films because it's become something of a cult mentality where great directors are auteurs and everyone else is something else. And I have found this sort of talk to be gatekeeping and very unpleasant. It becomes a fight between fandoms of particular directors saying, this director is great because of X, Y, and Z, and your favorite director is bad because he does not meet my requirements of X, Y, Z. And so the definition of great director becomes infused by biases and preferences that ultimately I don't think are that important. The major concern for a lot of people tends to be visual distinctiveness, which is why you get a lot of people praising someone like Zack Snyder these days because his movies are visually distinctive. But it's obviously not the whole story, is it? There's a lot more to filmmaking than just being visually distinctive, and focusing exclusively on that discards a lot of people, and I find it very unfortunate. So, to talk about Auteur Theory, you kind of have to go back to the very beginning. And the beginning of Auteur Theory is a 1954 article by François Truffaut and Cahiers de Cinema. And it's interesting to actually read it because the idea of auteur filmmaking has reached a point, in no small part of what Truffaut kind of later became, and especially his interview with Hitchcock, which he wrote a giant book about, that becomes this worship of great directors. The three main directors in the American sense that Cahiers de Cinema at the time were really focusing on within this context were John Ford, Alfred Hitchcock, and Howard Hawks. I've seen the complete filmographies. Well, as complete as can be. About half of John Ford's movies are lost. Of all three, and I love all three. They're all great, and I don't mind saying that. They're all great. It's interesting though because Howard Hawks is a chameleon director. He completely changed his style from movie to movie. Red River looks nothing like The Big Sleep, and that's on purpose because the movies just weren't the same. They were very different. And that original article was actually not praising these people. In fact, there were no American filmmakers at all mentioned in the actual article. It was a complaint about a current issue within French cinema, specifically at the time. And he focused mainly on a pair of writers, Jean Aronneau and Pierre Bost. That's who they are. And the article is just pretty much a very long complaint about those two writers in particular. And within the discussion of these writers, Truffaut makes a distinction between scenarists and great filmmakers. And he's doing this within the context of a discussion about directors working with these two writers. So the way he phrases it, scenarists who worked with Aronneau and Bost took everything that the two writers did at face value and just brought it forth to the screen. They didn't do anything to bring back their worst impulses. In Truffaut's point of view, he was mainly focusing on how psychological realism in these writers' movies was actually undermining the intention of source material. And he includes a very long section about Robert Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest. Now, Aronneau did not write Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest, but he did write a script earlier for Diary of a Country Priest that the original writer of the novel rejected. And Truffaut compares the kind of embrace of changing things within that script compared to how Bresson more faithfully adapts the book into cinematic language. And he's blaming Aronneau for all of the issues with that script. And he kind of implies that a lesser director would have just taken that and gone with it. So the portrait that Truffaut is painting is more complicated than I think people would want to imply. And I think it's more complex than Truffaut himself really quite grasped, especially considering his later worship of directors. The way I interpret it is that on every production there is a primary creative voice. Most of the time, it can be the director. And it becomes an easy thing to do, saying, okay, so follow the works of the directors to find their voice. And I think there is a lot to that. I think, if you're just going to make a generic example of things, then yes, the director is the right way to go. But it doesn't mean that it's exclusively true all of the time. Take a great historical example, Gone with the Wind. Did Victor Fleming make that movie? He is listed as the director. Is that his movie? David O. Selznick fired 5 directors. Well, he fired 4. There are 5 total who worked on the movie, including George Cukor, who is no slouch himself. But is it theirs at all? And it becomes obvious that no, it's not. It's David O. Selznick's. He was a producer, but he was just very active creatively. Every day, on set, looking at rushes, making directors change things. I've never quite understood why he never directed it himself, I'm going to be honest. But he didn't. He produced it. But he was such an active producer that it became his more than anyone else's. Does that minimize the greatness, the great entertainment value of Gone with the Wind because it's not actually a director's movie, because it's a producer's movie? We have example after example after example of producers who don't actually know what they're doing, undermining directors who do. I think a great, more recent example is the relationship that Martin Scorsese had with the Weinsteins, where on Gangs of New York, the reportedly, Scorsese's original cut was something like 4 hours long, and everyone who saw it raved over it. And then it came out in theaters in this 2.5 hour cut, something of a compromise between Scorsese and the Weinsteins. And, it has this more muted reaction. There's a lot that changed, including voiceovers. I think that there's a lot of structural stuff that changed as well. Kind of have to when you cut out more than a third of your film. And it's so whose film is that? It creates this murkiness, Scorsese's voice in that is so strong, it's hard to say it's Weinstein's, but it's also hard to say that it's entirely Scorsese's. And this is why auteur theory is much more complicated than just, there are auteurs and then there are directors. And I just generally don't like the distinction. So I have this advocacy for some minor form of auteur theory where someone in there is the main voice, is the main creative voice. It's usually the director, it's not always. And of course, there are different levels of this as well. Someone who only has a director credit is going to be less powerful than someone who has a writer-director credit, because they also wrote the script. It's also from them. But that's less powerful than the writer-director-producer. And so you reach certain aspects where you have someone like a Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood is a great example. He didn't write, but he did produce most of his films. So here's this producer-director making most of his films. As a producer himself, he is his own boss. Is he less of a auteur than someone like a Scorsese? Less of an auteur than someone like a Tarantino or a Ford or a Hitchcock or a Cocteau or a Truffaut? And having gone through all of Eastwood's work, I think that's obviously not true. He has very clear thematic things to say. But one of the big things against him in a lot of people's eyes is that he makes things in a very classical style. He doesn't make things flamboyant. He's not pushing the boundaries of cinema. So therefore, he's less of an auteur. You got to spin that camera around. You got to do weird things to make things look different. And I just don't think it's that important. Clint Eastwood's movies are great. I'd rather have The Unforgiven as it is than, directed in a way that kind of distracts from the character and the mood of the piece. So does that mean that I am dismissive of the more visually minded? No, not at all. I'm interested by them. I'm always on the lookout for them. I recently went through the works of Mario Bava, and I was very entertained by his visual distinctiveness. But I was also frustrated by his narrative shortcomings. Directing is a hard job. Assuming you don't have a producer breathing down your neck every day on set, you have to manage a bunch of departments. You have to manage actors. You have to manage cinematographers. You have to manage prop masters. You have to manage set designers, locations. And if something goes wrong on any of them, an actor is sick, a location is unavailable, the prop is too big or too small for what was intended, a lens broke, a light blew out. You have to make changes constantly that advance the production forward in a very real business sense of just continuing to film things in accordance with the script, but that also don't go against the script at the same time, that advance the vision of the film, even though something planned went wrong. And this is even without consideration of a producer is on set saying, I don't like how this is doing, or an actor is saying, I don't know why I'm doing this, or an actor won't come out of his trailer because someone called him by his real name. Directing's a hard job. You have to manage a lot. And so the skill set to actually manage all of that is very rare. And so most end up having some sort of base ability to manage a film set, to take a script, film it in handsome ways, and move on. But few have that vision to say, this script is good, but I need this to make it great. This performance is good, but I need this to make it great. This edit is good, but I need this to make it great. And so that's where the value of the director is. However, the number of directors like that is very, very small. Does that mean I should be dismissive of those who don't manage it at that level? Or does that mean that the director is king? The way I see it is a strong director can be king. And a very bad director can be king. I think a good counterexample is Joel Schumacher. I don't really like the works of Joel Schumacher. There are a handful that I think are pretty good, mostly when he's in a very tight box from producers. In particular, his John Grisham adaptations. Grisham produced his adaptations, and so Grisham had a lot of say in casting and scripting, and he was apparently on set a bunch during production. And so could Schumacher go neon colors in A Time to Kill? Could Schumacher put nipples on Tommy Lee Jones's suit in The Client? No, he had to work within a very tight box, and that actually ended up helping him because there was only so much he could do. So, do I believe in auteur theory? To a certain extent. I think it has value. But ultimately, auteur theory is more about kind of discovering whose vision it is. Sometimes there is no real vision. You know? Sometimes it's just a bad screenwriter, a bad director, and a bad producer don't care, get together, and something comes out. Beverly Hills Cop 3. There. There's no vision to that movie from anyone. It's just a paycheck. Should that, remark about Eddie Murphy or John Hughes or anyone else? I think it's a reflection of their reality at that moment in time, but there's nothing really artistic to say about it. But the Blues Brothers? I think that says something about John Hughes, because it's obvious he cared. And so every movie is a case-by-case basis. And it just ultimately comes down to movies are complicated. Art is complicated. There's a bunch of stuff out there that goes into making this. And just trying to make it only about the director is foolhardy. They're a very big piece. They can be the dominant piece if they try. But ultimately trying to encompass all of filmmaking through just directors is foolhardy and incomplete. Which makes me wonder why I go through directors at all. Mostly because it's easy. I'm kind of lazy. And it becomes like, okay, here's 30 to 40 movies to watch over the next couple of months. Let's just watch them. Let's see what we can find. Is this director a strong director with something to say? Is he a weak director with nothing to say? Does he make good movies? And that's ultimately all I care about. I just care about if they're making good movies. So Howard Hawks, great. He made great, good movies. Alfred Hitchcock made great, good movies. What's similar about them? They both used film and light. There's almost nothing else similar about them. So, welcome to my director series, where I will walk through directors. I will try to see if there is a vision, and I will discover the history of cinema through them. It's not the only way to do it. It's an easy way to do it, and I'll probably be doing it other ways sometimes too. Until next time.